if a church is all about the Sunday morning experience, what then is the mechanism that you put in place, if there is one, to help create this culture? And you've, again, alluded to it from the relational standpoint, starts with the pastors, leads it down, kind of the trickle down effect. But what other things can you put into place in order to bring out this heart-shaped community so it's not a attractional, we go to class, formal instruction, so that it's the organic, real, I want to be with you, joy activity that we want it to be?
Yeah. Well, it's an excellent question because it is a bit intangible, right? Mm-hmm. But if you think about it, most of the organic things that develop are building around something programmed. Mm-hmm. So when you went to high school, it was a very programmed thing, but you made friends there that you wanted to hang out with afterwards. So even though you've been with them all day, you still wanted to hang out with them that night. You know, what's going on there? Well, that's because you have a joy bond with those people. You have joy and energy when you're around them. So churches can't mandate that, right? You can't program that, but you can put programs together that give people the opportunity to connect. And then you have to begin infusing your cultures with values. And some of those values you model, some of them you teach, some of it, but you're using teaching and instruction and modeling and practice to start getting certain skills into these places to make it more likely. So this is why you can have two churches that have exactly the same programming, and one will flourish relationally and the other won't. And it really comes down to the maturity of the people who are not just the maturity of the person who organized the structure, but the maturity of the people who are actively running it. Mm. So that's why you can go to one small group and it's just blah. And you can go to another small group and it's life-changing. And it usually has to do with, again, that maturity and capacity of those who are leading. And so that trickles down. So like in youth groups, it's often the youth themselves and the level of maturity they're bringing to the leadership that they bring into this that makes a big difference. And so I often use youth as an example because I've talked to so many pastors, like, how do we not lose our young people? And they come up with the same two answers, and that is better apologetics and a more cool experience, right? And I'm like, well, what if the actual answer there is attachment? What if the reason we're losing our young people is they feel no attachment to the people in the church? And so the only people they know are the other teenagers, and they don't know anybody else in the church. So why would they come back?
Are you familiar with Christian Smith's work?
No, for now.
So Christian Smith, a researcher out of Notre Dame, he wrote some books years ago, and it was based on the study of religion in American youth. And that's not how they, Souls in Transition was there was a work before that. The second volume was Souls in Transition. He wrote another one. But in the book, he talks about, they were doing a study on youth, American youth and religion, but they didn't let the people in the study know that was about, and it was over a period of time. Basically, it came down to how are there factors that we can isolate for people who grew up in the church and stayed in it? And he said it came down to three things that they saw. Number one was that the family did what they practiced, or what the parents did what they said, and they practiced what they preached. Number two, they suffered in some capacity for their faith. But thirdly, and I thought this was an interesting one, it was another adult outside of the family reiterated what the parents said. But that's that attachment issue. There's some type of relationship with a person who's an adult. This kind of flies in the face of a lot of the modern youth ministry. And like you, I hear all the time, apologetics. And again, apologetics has its place. Worldview has its place. We're not saying that those don't have its place, but like with anything, it's not the solution to everything. It's a good thing can become the primary thing, then it becomes a bad thing. So we're saying, or what I'm hearing you say, and I do agree with you, is that the relational aspect informs a lot of those other pieces that we don't realize. I mean, we do need to have a reason to give a reason for the hope that we have in Christ Jesus. At the same time, it's the relational components that we are losing that the church has not paid very much attention to. And when people are leaving the church, oftentimes it's not because of apologetics. They know the answers. This is why I think people are deconstructing right now, is that they have the answers, but they don't have the relational they don't have the relational identity, and that some of them are rebelling against what they see has been taught to them, and it wasn't within the context of relationship, or it was not helpful. It was only to keep them in subjection, if you will, and not actually for their benefit or their joy to understand in a greater way who God is. I mean, what do you think about that? Am I way off there, or am I a genius?
Well,
wait, what was that conceited thing?
I said, being the people pleaser that I am, you're a genius. Now, all right.
Right. Now my wife's like, oh, you have no idea what you've just done.
No, it's funny.
His head has become a float at the Macy's Day Parade. Not a genius at all. Well, but anyway, go ahead.
But you're spot on though, in terms of, it's like my son went to a private Christian school for the last couple of years. It was one of the biggest ones in the Midwest. And he told me that most of his friends are not Christians who attend there. Right. And he said that most of them can't wait to leave home and to never go back to anything Christian. So why? Right? Why is that the case? Because they're in Bible classes, right? They're getting theology, and they're getting apologetics, and they're getting they have spiritual emphasis week, right? They've got preachers coming in. They have mandatory chapel where they got preachers coming in and tell them stuff. So what's going on here? For the number one answer was family. There is an inconsistency between what the family is trying to get the school to Christianize their kid, but they're not really doing it at home.
Yep.
Secondly, my big thing is at the family level is that the goal of parenting was get your kids to perform and succeed. And so now we're beginning to then the pendulum kind of swung the other way, and that is just love your kids and don't worry if they succeed. And what we're looking at here, what I used to tell my kids is, because I love you, I want you to succeed. And that's why we're going to have to do, correcting when there's correcting. But what I found is that there is a joyful foundation between parent and child. The correction is easier, and they are way more open to what you have to offer. But if I have a fear foundation in my relationship with my kids, right, then I'm using more fear to try to get them to be Christian. And there is no joy pull to Christianity. And it's not just families. That happens in churches. It happens in the schools. It happens in all these other places. So people can be saturated with Christian environments, but all those Christian environments are kind of anchored in the fear of you better, instead of actually really developing the kind of joyful attachment makes them want to be a part of this.
That's the challenge, though, isn't it? I mean, what about the people that are not in a leadership position? I mean, I've been in leadership positions. It's easier when you're in a leadership position. Most people, though, don't think about this. I mean, and you and I both know this. Sometimes it feels like we're trying to push that rock up this hill, and helping people to see the power of it. The reality of this is where actually they live.
Yeah. And that's why largely what we're talking about here is that I need to be a personally mature person in whatever I'm dealing with. Right. So if I'm a personally mature person with my family, it's going to help the family. If I'm a personally mature person in the workplace, it's going to help the workplace. I may have no ability to influence the structures or the overall culture of the place, but simply by being a joyful, mature person, I have an impact. So I can control what I can control. It's not my job to transform a toxic culture. It's not my job to do that unless that's what I've been called in to do. And so now as a leader, I'm going, okay, if I am like in charge, then I'm looking at what am I in charge of, and to what extent can I infuse this kind of relational community into this culture? So maybe I'm the football coach, but I can't run the whole school, but I have some control over this team. Or maybe I am, I'm a parent. I got some control of my family, even though I don't have control over the church. So you're looking at, where do I have influence? What can I affect? And how do I breed a culture of, joy and handling emotions together for them? So there's a lot. People are like, well, how do you do this? How do you do this? And that's, there's a lot of training that goes into this, because what's supposed to happen is that we're all supposed to naturally develop this just because of all the mature people that we're raised by. Right. So maturity development is supposed to happen because as an infant, I've got my older brothers and sisters, or I've got aunts and uncles, and I got grandparents, and I got my parents, and I've got the friends of the family, and all of these people can handle emotions, and they're all there helping me. And so what you find is that people who are naturally joyful and naturally resilient often don't know how they got there. And it's because they just kind of grew up with it, with all of these relational connections and all this. And what happens with those relational connections is this kind of confidence that I'm never going to have to go through anything alone. My people will go through this with me. So whereas if I'm in a completely broken environment and I have to learn to be self-sufficient and self-reliant, and I never know who's going to be with me when I go through things, it's much harder to have emotional resilience and emotional stability because I didn't grow up with it. And so now what Dr. Wilder and Chris Corsi and myself and people like that are trying to do is break this down. If I did not grow up with it, I don't have this. This is foreign. Where do I start? How do I begin building this? So I actually have a book coming out with Chris Corsi next year called The 4 Habits of Joy-Filled People, right? It's designed to do exactly that. Where do I start? But we kind of do that in Real Leadership of the Workplace too. There are what we call 8 maturity workouts in this book. So the idea is that if you do these workouts with a small group of people and everybody's doing them and you do this together, it puts you in position to begin growing some of the skills and habits that lead to greater emotional maturity.